In this audiobook, we will challenge these illusions directly. We will question why money became the measure of worth, why time feels like an enemy instead of an ally, and why the ego insists on applause instead of authenticity. These conversations are not about abandoning success or rejecting ambition. They are about reclaiming the ability to choose what truly matters, to build a life that serves you instead of a life that drains you. Escaping the illusion is not about escaping the world. It is about seeing the world clearly. It is about acting with awareness rather than impulse, courage rather than insecurity, mastery rather than approval. If you are ready to think differently, to slow down just enough to notice what actually drives your life, then you are already on the path. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop letting money define your worth. Money has always been a strange kind of mirror. It reflects back an image of who we think we are and who we believe we should become. We attach our self-worth to the number in our bank account, the price tag on our clothes, the salary printed on a contract, or the lifestyle we imagine we should be living. And when the numbers don't look as impressive as we hoped, we quietly conclude that we are somehow less valuable, less capable, less successful, less enough. This is one of the most powerful illusions in modern life, and it runs deep. From childhood, you were told that the path to success is paved with financial achievement. Good job equals good money equals good life. Good life equals respect, admiration, and validation. And while there is truth buried somewhere in that story, the danger is that it turns money into a scoreboard for human value. When that happens, your worth becomes conditional. Conditional on results, on outcomes, on external approval, and on whether the world claps for you. But here is the quiet truth. Money can measure many things, but it cannot measure you. It cannot measure your integrity. It cannot measure your grit. It cannot measure your compassion, your creativity, your imagination, or your ability to transform your own life over time. Money is not the source of your worth. It is simply a resource, fuel for the journey, not proof of your legitimacy. When you let money define your worth, you give away power. You hand over the authority to decide whether you are enough. And once you do that, someone else is always in control. Your employer, your industry, the economy, the opinions of people who do not even know you. You live in reaction instead of direction. You begin to chase rather than choose. So here's a shift. Instead of asking, how much is this person worth? Ask a better question. How does this person live? Do they build? Do they contribute? Do they honor their commitments? Do they grow? Do they make others better? These are the real indicators of wealth. Even if they don't show up on spreadsheets, you can have $100 million and still feel small, insecure and unseen. You can have modest means and still walk with dignity, purpose, and strength. Financial abundance amplifies who you already are. It does not replace self-respect you never built. This is why escaping the illusion matters. When you separate your identity from your income, you regain the freedom to pursue goals that actually matter to you, instead of goals that merely look good to others. You allow yourself to learn, to fail, to improve, and to grow without feeling like every misstep is proof that you are worthless. And growth requires that freedom. Mastery requires that freedom. Fulfillment requires that freedom. Money is valuable. Yes, it can elevate your life, expand your options, and protect the people you love. But your worth came first. It was there long before the numbers appeared, and it will remain long after they change. When you remember that, you stop performing and start becoming. You stop chasing validation and start building value. And that is when real wealth begins. Chapter 2. Redefine what being truly wealthy means. If you never stop to question what wealth really is, you will spend your entire life chasing someone else's definition, and that is a painful way to live. Too many people inherit their dreams instead of choosing them. They inherit ideas about success, about lifestyle, about status, and about what a good life should look like. They never pause long enough to ask, does this actually matter to me? So they gather symbols, houses, cars, titles, accounts, yet still feel a quiet emptiness when the door closes at night. True wealth begins where the illusion ends, and the illusion tells you that wealth is only measured in currency. That wealth means more digits, more possessions, more expensive tastes. But what if wealth wasn't mostly about more at all? What if wealth was about better quality, better health, better relationships, better mastery over your own time, better alignment with your values, better control over the trajectory of your life? That shift changes everything. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Without a broader definition of wealth, you can become financially rich and emotionally bankrupt. You can become materially abundant and spiritually empty. You can have everything the world applauds and yet lose the parts of yourself that make life worth living. And people do it all the time. They sacrifice time for money, then sacrifice health for status, then sacrifice relationships for reputation, and in the end, they look up and wonder how the scoreboard ended up so lopsided. But let's slow down and redefine wealth from the ground up. Let's break it into forms that almost never get discussed. First, there is wealth of time. Time is the foundation, because without time, everything else collapses. What good is financial abundance if you have no hours to enjoy it, no space to reflect, and no room to live? A person with a modest income but full control over their schedule may be far wealthier than someone who earns 10 times more but is owned by their calendar. Time wealth is the ability to choose your hours and choose your pace. It is the power to pause, the power to rest, the power to think, to learn, to be present. Then there is wealth of health, not just the absence of illness, but the presence of vitality, the energy to build, the clarity to make decisions, the stamina to do hard things, the strength to withstand life's demands. When your body is functioning well, the world feels more open. When it is not, nothing feels abundant, no matter how much money is involved. Health wealth is often invisible until it disappears. Then suddenly, it becomes the only thing that matters. Next, consider wealth of skills. Skills are portable wealth because they travel with you everywhere, regardless of where the economy moves or what life throws at you. Skills turn uncertainty into opportunity. They allow you to adapt, to earn, to create, and to reinvent yourself. A skilled person is rarely truly poor because skills generate value, and value eventually generates options. Then comes wealth of relationships, not social connections for status, but relationships built on trust, respect, honesty, and genuine care. People often underestimate this form of wealth until crisis arrives. When life becomes difficult, money can help, but people save you. Support saves you. Love saves you. Relationship wealth determines whether you go through life alone or surrounded, hardened or held. Another form is wealth of sovereignty. Sovereignty is the ability to make decisions based on what is right for you, rather than what others expect from you. It is the freedom to say no without guilt, and yes without fear. Sovereignty feels like ownership of your life, your time, your choices, your direction. Without sovereignty, wealth becomes a script someone else wrote for you. There is also wealth of purpose, a mission, a direction, something that pulls you rather than something you chase. Money amplifies purpose, but purpose gives money meaning. When people have purpose, they can endure discomfort, delays, failures, and detours, because they are anchored. Without purpose, everything feels heavy, even if life appears successful from the outside. And finally, there is wealth of peace. Peace means not needing to prove anything. It means not feeling threatened by other people's success. It means being grounded enough to experience joy, without comparison and ambition, without anxiety. Peace is one of the rarest forms of wealth, because it cannot be bought, borrowed, or performed. It must be built internally, through awareness and self-understanding. When you combine these forms of wealth, you begin to understand something profound. Money is only one slice of the pie. Important, yes. Useful, absolutely, but incomplete on its own. So here's the challenge. Instead of chasing wealth you can display, start building wealth you can live. Instead of asking, how do I get more? Begin asking, how do I improve the quality of my life in ways money alone cannot achieve? When that becomes your measurement, you stop living for applause and start living for substance. And that quietly, steadily, is when life becomes rich. Chapter 3. Guard your time like it's your last asset. If there is one resource people treat carelessly, it is time, not because they don't value it, but because they mistakenly believe there will always be more of it. More tomorrow, more next week, more someday. And that illusion is powerful. It makes urgency feel optional, and priorities feel negotiable. It lets you postpone your dreams, delay your growth, and tolerate circumstances that slowly drain the life out of you. But here's the clarity you rarely hear spoken out loud. Time is not something you manage, it's something you spend, and once it's spent, there is no refund. The irony is that society teaches us to guard our money, our possessions, and our reputation long before it teaches us to guard our time. You will think twice before lending someone a large amount of money, but you will casually hand over hours to people, habits, and distractions that offer nothing in return. You will protect your wallet with seriousness, yet leave your calendar unguarded and open to invasion. The imbalance is striking. You can always earn more money, but you can never earn more time. Every hour you waste is an hour you will never live again. To guard your time, you must first recognize where it goes, and often it slips away in small unnoticed leaks. The idle scrolling, the endless notifications, the conversations without purpose, the tasks done out of obligation rather than intention, the meetings that could have been an email, the favors that stretch into commitments you didn't choose, the avoidance disguised as "I'll start later." These leaks seem harmless individually, but collectively, they shape the entire trajectory of your life. Think of time as energy in motion. Wherever you allocate it, you invest part of your life. This means protecting your time isn't selfish, it's responsible, it's strategic. It's the foundation of a meaningful existence. Few people regret spending money, but many people regret spending time on things that never mattered. The regret usually comes later, when the consequences can no longer be undone. Guarding your time requires learning one simple but difficult word. No, not the angry no, but the respectful no. The strategic no. The "I choose where my life goes" no. People who cannot say no end up living someone else's agenda. They become busy, but not productive. Needed, but not fulfilled. Surrounded, but not aligned. There is a quiet courage in refusing the non-essential, because every no is also a yes to something else. Your work, your health, your peace, your relationships, your curiosity, your future. Another way time escapes you is through the illusion of busyness. Activity can easily replace progress if you are not paying attention. You can fill your calendar with tasks, calls, errands and obligations, and still move nowhere for months or years. Progress isn't measured by motion, it's measured by direction, and direction requires intentional time allocation. Ask yourself, If I keep spending my time this way for the next 5 years, where will it lead? If the answer makes you uneasy, your time needs a new strategy. Also remember that urgency and importance are not the same. Urgent things demand your attention. Important things determine your future. Most people live in reaction to the urgent and never make time for the important. They handle crises, interruptions, messages, requests and noise all day, and wonder why nothing meaningful changes. To guard your time, you must reverse that pattern. Schedule what matters before it becomes something you regret. And then there's the illusion of later. Later feels comfortable, later feels safe, later feels rational. But later is the most expensive word in the world. Later kills dreams softly. Later convinces you that potential can be stored indefinitely, when in reality, unused potential decays. Projects don't die because people are incapable. They die because people wait too long to begin. When you treat time like an asset, everything shifts. You stop giving it away cheaply. You stop apologizing for protecting your calendar. You stop filling your days with low-value distractions. You start investing in activities that compound: learning, creation, skill development, meaningful connection, rest that actually restores you. This is how wealth of time turns into wealth of life. One day, whether you think about it or not, you will run out of hours. The question is not whether time will run out, but whether you will have used it in a way that made the running worth it. Guard your time, not out of fear, but out of respect for the life you are building. When time becomes precious, so does everything you choose to do with it. Chapter 4. Quit confusing activity with progress. There is a dangerous trap in modern life that almost no one sees until years have passed. The trap of being busy without moving forward. It's easy to believe that motion equals progress because activity feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels like effort. It gives you the psychological reward of doing something, even when that something isn't taking you anywhere meaningful. The world even rewards busyness. People respect it. They praise it. They admire it. If you tell someone you're overwhelmed, they assume you must be doing important things. But busyness is not a badge of honor. It's not a measure of ambition. It's not proof that you're advancing. Sometimes it's just noise. Sometimes it's avoidance. The uncomfortable truth is that busyness often becomes a socially acceptable form of procrastination. Progress, on the other hand, is different. Progress is quiet. Progress is intentional. Progress demands clarity. It requires you to decide what actually matters, and then remove everything that doesn't. Progress often looks slower from the outside, because it isn't scattered. It's focused. It's aligned. It builds in a straight line, rather than in circles. To understand this difference, look at how people fill their days. Many have full calendars, long task lists, and endless notifications. They attend meetings, answer messages, run errands, check boxes, and keep up with obligations. At the end of the day, they collapse into bed exhausted, yet cannot point to anything that actually moved their life forward. The feeling is familiar: tired, but not fulfilled, active, but not proud, busy, but not changed. That is what activity without progress feels like. Why does this happen? It happens because progress demands decisions, and decisions demand responsibility. When you choose a direction, you must also choose what to ignore. That is uncomfortable. Avoidance feels safer. If you stay busy, you don't have to face the decisions that matter. You don't have to clarify what you really want. You don't have to confront your fears of failure, judgment, or inadequacy. Being busy allows you to hide inside motion. Another reason activity replaces progress is because society normalizes output instead of outcome. We are trained to ask, what did I get done today, instead of what actually changed today. Those are not the same questions. One focuses on volume, the other focuses on impact. High achievers understand this distinction deeply. The average person asks how to do more. A wise person asks how to do less, but better. To break this pattern, you need two things: clarity and courage. Clarity comes from defining what progress means to you, not to your parents, not to culture, not to social media, just you. What does a meaningful year look like? What would make the next 5 years worth living? What would you regret not attempting? Without these answers, activity fills the vacuum. If you don't choose a direction, distractions will choose one for you. Courage is required, because clarity always demands cuts. Some tasks, relationships, commitments, habits, and comforts must go. People cling to low-impact tasks because they're familiar, they're easy, they're predictable, they don't involve risk. But progress usually lives on the other side of the uncomfortable, the uncertain, the hard, the meticulous, the slow, and the humbling. That's why it's rare. Not because people don't want progress, but because they don't want the discomfort required to create it. Here's a practical way to differentiate activity from progress. Ask yourself whether what you're doing compounds. Does it build a skill? Does it build a relationship? Does it build a body of work? Does it build a reputation? Does it build health? Does it build financial optionality? If an action compounds, it's progress. If it merely fills time, it's activity. Another useful lens is to examine where your efforts lead. If you repeat this day 100 times, would your life noticeably change? If the answer is no, you are stuck in motion. Progress almost always produces change, even small change, because it aligns your time with the future you're building. The illusion of activity is seductive, because it's easier to feel busy than to feel purposeful. But if you want to escape that illusion, you must learn to trade effort for direction, volume for impact, and urgency for intention. When you do, the noise dies down, distractions lose their power, and life stops feeling like a treadmill. You don't just stay busy, you move forward. You build something, you become someone. And that shift from motion to progress changes everything. Chapter 5. Train yourself to think in decades, not days. The modern world conditions you to think short-term. You are encouraged to chase quick results, instant gratification, fast approval, and immediate payoff. The faster something works, the more attractive it seems. The sooner something shows a return, the more legitimate it feels. And because of this conditioning, people quit too early, panic too soon, and judge themselves long before the seeds they planted ever had a chance to grow. Thinking in days makes you impatient. Thinking in decades makes you unstoppable. When you adopt a long-term frame, everything changes. You stop expecting transformation to happen overnight. You stop comparing your progress to someone else's highlight reel. You stop giving up at the first signs of difficulty. You stop seeking shortcuts that cost you more than they save. Long-term thinking gives you the resilience to stay in the game long enough to actually win the game. But long-term thinking doesn't just affect how you pursue goals, it affects what goals you choose in the first place. When you ask, "What will matter to me in 10 years?" your priorities rearrange themselves. The pursuits that only look good disappear, and the pursuits that feel meaningful take center stage. Short-term goals are often about ego. Long-term goals are about identity. Short-term thinking asks, "How can I look successful quickly?" Long-term thinking asks, "What kind of person am I becoming?" Look at the most valuable things in life: mastery, reputation, skill, health, relationships, wisdom. Not one of these can be built with short-term thinking. They require commitment. They require investment. They require patience. They require the willingness to endure boredom, setbacks, repetition, and delayed payoff. They require you to live beyond the illusion that fast is always better. The ego loves fast. The ego wants applause today, validation tomorrow, and results by the end of the week. That is why the ego struggles with mastery. Mastery doesn't care about your timetable. It demands long seasons of practice without external recognition. It asks you to keep improving when no one is watching. And that is precisely why mastery feels rewarding. It belongs to you. It cannot be fake, purchased, or performed. To think in decades is to step outside the rhythm of the modern consumer cycle. It is to ask different questions. Instead of asking, "What can I get quickly?" you begin asking, "What can I build slowly?" Instead of asking, "What gives me status now?" you begin asking, "What gives me fulfillment later?" Instead of asking, "What feels good today?" you begin asking, "What will make my life richer over time?" These are the kinds of questions that shape futures rather than just moments. But let's address the barrier: patience. Patience is not passive. Patience is not sitting and waiting for results to arrive by accident. Patience is active endurance. Patience is disciplined repetition. Patience is showing up when progress is invisible. Patience is holding on to the direction even when external validation disappears. You don't need to enjoy the slow parts. You need to outlast them. The market rewards long-term thinkers because they are rare. Most people are competing for short-term gains and immediate validation. Few are playing the long game. When you extend your timeline, you reduce your competition. You stop fighting for scraps and start building things that compound. Compounding is the secret force behind long-term thinking. Anything that compounds, whether skills, knowledge, relationships, wealth, or reputation, begins slowly and then accelerates beyond imagination. But compounding only works if you let time do its part. If you constantly restart, switch paths, change goals, or abandon projects, because the early phase feels slow, you interrupt compounding every time. And every interruption resets your progress back to zero. Think about it like this: if you give yourself 1 year to accomplish something, you limit your strategies to whatever can produce visible results within 1 year. But if you give yourself 10 years, you can pursue deeper strategies based on mastery, leverage, and exponential growth, rather than urgency and shortcuts. Longer horizons create better decisions because they remove panic from the process. When you shift your thinking from days to decades, you stop asking whether something is working and start asking whether it is worth it. That is a powerful distinction. Worth it focuses on meaning, identity, and legacy. Working focuses only on speed. Time is not your enemy. Impatience is. The more you extend your horizon, the calmer you become, the smarter you behave, and the better your life compounds. And over time, that mindset, quiet, patient and steady, builds a future that short-term thinkers will spend their whole lives chasing. Chapter 6. Detach from the need to impress anyone. There is a moment in life when you realize how much energy you have spent trying to look good in the eyes of others. How many decisions you made for the sake of being admired. How many goals you pursued, not because they were meaningful, but because they were impressive. How many risks you avoided because you feared embarrassment. How much time you wasted trying to manage people's perceptions instead of building your own reality. This is one of the most powerful illusions the ego creates. The illusion that approval equals worth. The need to impress others is rooted in something ancient. Humans evolved to belong, to be accepted, to not be rejected by the tribe. In the modern world, that instinct didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Instead of fearing exile, we fear judgment. Instead of fearing being cast out, we fear being ignored. Instead of fearing physical danger, we fear social embarrassment. And so we perform. We curate. We edit ourselves. We exaggerate our achievements and hide our flaws. We build a persona to present to the world and hope it will be enough. But here's the quiet truth. People rarely acknowledge, most of the people you're trying to impress are not thinking about you at all. They are too busy thinking about themselves, their own status, their own struggles, their own insecurities, their own performance. The ego makes you believe you are under constant evaluation, when in reality you are barely on the scoreboard of other people's attention. Once you understand this, life becomes lighter. Needing to impress others is expensive. It costs you authenticity. It costs you peace. It costs you clarity. It makes you chase symbols of identity instead of substance. You buy things you don't need, pursue goals you don't care about, and say yes when your soul is whispering no. You shape your life to match an audience you never chose. And that is a tragic way to exist, because it means you are living someone else's script while ignoring your own. Detachment begins with honesty. Ask yourself, if no one could see my success, would I still want it? If the answer is yes, that goal belongs to you. It aligns with your values, your desires, your aspirations. But if the answer is no, that goal is probably about performance. It's about what it looks like, not what it feels like. And goals built on appearance are fragile, because they collapse the moment the applause fades. Another powerful question: if no one ever found out, would I still do this? People who operate from ego need witnesses. They need an audience to validate their effort. But true builders don't. True creators don't. True masters don't. They are pulled by the work, not by the attention. They are locked into the craft, not the clapping. The applause becomes a bonus, not the fuel. To detach from the need to impress, you must also learn to tolerate disappointment. The ego wants everyone to approve, everyone to admire, everyone to agree, but agreement is overrated. Approval is inconsistent. Admiration fades. Detachment means accepting that not everyone will understand you, not everyone will support you, not everyone will see your vision, and that's okay. They don't have to. The only person who must understand your direction is you. There is a deeper benefit to detachment as well. It gives you access to real growth. When you stop fearing judgment, you can experiment more freely. When you stop performing, you can learn without the pressure of looking perfect. When you stop pretending, you can receive feedback that actually helps. The ego makes everything high stakes. Detachment lowers the stakes and raises the learning. Imagine how much progress you could make if you weren't afraid of looking inexperienced. How many new skills you could acquire if competence didn't have to look glamorous in the early stages. How much further you could go if you didn't need to prove you were already succeeding along the way. The early stages of growth are messy, and ego hates messy. But messy is where mastery begins. The world does not need another person who looks successful. It needs more people who actually are. People who build, people who learn, people who contribute, people who are not distracted by performance. When you detach from impressing others, you gain something more valuable than approval. You gain yourself, your time, your direction, your peace, your authenticity, and perhaps most importantly, your power to live a life that belongs to you, rather than to the crowd. Chapter 7. Choose the difficult path when it makes you better. There is a reason most people avoid the difficult path. It rarely feels good in the beginning. Growth often disguises itself as struggle. Progress introduces itself as discomfort. And transformation arrives in the form of challenges, resistance, and uncertainty. The ego hates this. The ego wants ease, convenience, and comfort. It wants the simplest route, the fastest solution, the least amount of friction. But comfort does not produce capability. Only challenge does. Capability is built in the space where you are demanded to stretch, adapt, learn, endure, and rise. The difficult path isn't valuable because it is hard. It is valuable because of who you become by choosing it. When you choose difficulty deliberately, you are no longer reacting to life. You are training for it. You become someone who doesn't break when pressure arrives. Someone who doesn't fold when obstacles appear. Someone who can withstand seasons that would overwhelm most people. That resilience becomes a form of power no one can take away from you. Look at any area of life worth pursuing: health, mastery, leadership, entrepreneurship, relationships, finances, creative success. Every worthwhile arena rewards those who push through difficulty. But here's the pattern: difficulty comes first, results come later. That time gap is where most people quit. They assume difficulty is a sign that they chose the wrong path. But difficulty is not a red flag, it is a signal of potential. If something was immediately easy, everyone would do it, and it would hold no value. There are different types of difficulty. There is difficulty that drains you, and difficulty that builds you. Not all suffering is productive. Not all discomfort is meaningful. The question to ask is, does this difficulty make me stronger, wiser, more capable, more disciplined, or more aligned with who I want to become? If the answer is yes, that difficulty is an investment, not a burden. Difficulty that makes you better is the kind you must learn to lean into rather than avoid. Avoiding difficulty has consequences. When you avoid the gym, your body weakens. When you avoid hard conversations, relationships decay. When you avoid financial discipline, debt compounds. When you avoid emotional discomfort, insecurities deepen. When you avoid learning new skills, your opportunities shrink. Avoidance doesn't eliminate difficulty, it just delays it, and often makes it worse. Meanwhile, facing difficulty early creates leverage later. You pay the price once and enjoy the return for years. Choosing the difficult path also builds identity. Identity is not what you tell yourself. Identity is what you prove to yourself through action. When you choose the hard option over the easy one, you demonstrate to yourself that you are capable of more than comfort would suggest. Repetition of those choices shapes identity. Suddenly you don't just believe you are resilient, you know it. You don't just believe you are disciplined, you embody it. True confidence comes from evidence, and evidence comes from difficult decisions. But let's acknowledge the resistance. Difficulty often begins without reward. You don't get applause for doing the hard things privately. No one cheers when you choose discipline over impulse. No one celebrates your small daily struggles. And that's the point. The difficult path forges internal strength, not external validation. Validation may come later, if at all, but the real reward is who you become during the climb. The world tries to sell you shortcuts. Get rich fast. Get fit fast. Master skills without effort. Become successful without sacrifice. These messages are appealing, but they are illusions. Shortcuts rarely shortcut anything meaningful. They rob you of the struggle, and the struggle is where the substance comes from. Without the struggle, there is no depth, no durability, no lasting impact. The paradox is that choosing the difficult path eventually makes life easier. When you build strength, challenges shrink. When you build skills, opportunities expand. When you build discipline, temptations lose power. When you build resilience, setbacks become temporary instead of devastating. People who avoid difficulty experience an easier life today and a harder life later. People who embrace difficulty experience a harder life today and an easier life later. The choice is not whether you will face difficulty, but when. So as you move forward, ask yourself, which version of me does this path create? Choose the difficult path when it shapes you into someone you respect. Choose the difficult path when it leads to mastery rather than mediocrity. Choose the difficult path when it builds a life with structure rather than a life built on shortcuts. Not because difficulty is inherently noble, but because the life you truly want will demand strength, and strength is not built in ease. Strength is built where effort meets intention. Chapter 8. Build systems so discipline isn't required. Discipline is powerful, but discipline alone is unreliable. It rises and falls with energy, mood, motivation, stress, and environment. Some days you feel unstoppable. Other days you feel sluggish, distracted, or unmotivated. If your life depends solely on discipline, you will succeed only when you feel strong, and life simply doesn't guarantee you will feel strong every day. Systems solve that problem. Systems turn intention into structure. Systems make the desired behavior automatic instead of heroic. Think about the areas where you struggle most. You don't struggle because you don't know what to do. You struggle because you rely on willpower to do it. Willpower is a short-term tool. It gets you through crises, not through decades. Systems are long-term. They create consistency even on days when you're tired, stressed, overwhelmed, or uninspired. The mistake people make is assuming successful people are more disciplined than everyone else. The truth is they build environments, routines, habits, and processes that make discipline less necessary. Imagine a person who wants to read more. If they rely on motivation, they'll read occasionally when time and mood align. If they rely on a system, they read 15 minutes every night before bed. That tiny system compounds over time until they've absorbed shelves of books without ever needing to hype themselves up. Or imagine someone trying to save money. If they rely on discipline, they must constantly choose not to spend. If they rely on a system, they automatically transfer a portion of their income every month into savings or investments, eliminating the need to make dozens of micro decisions. Systems protect you from the moment-to-moment battles that exhaust discipline. A strong system has three components: default behavior, reduced friction, and consistent triggers. Default behavior means designing the path, so the right action is the easiest action. Reduced friction means shrinking obstacles so small they no longer derail you. Consistent triggers anchor habits to specific times, places, or contexts. When these pieces align, behavior becomes predictable. Predictability compounds faster than effort. Consider health. The person who relies on discipline must constantly decide to eat healthy meals, drink enough water, and move their body. The person with a system shops for the right foods on Sundays, prepares meals ahead of time, keeps water on their desk, and schedules workouts into their calendar as appointments. No heroic discipline required, just systems doing the heavy lifting. The difference after 6 months is enormous. The difference after 6 years is life-changing. Systems create leverage. Leverage means effort multiplied. Without systems, effort resets every day back to zero. With systems, progress accumulates automatically. That's why systems are one of the most powerful escapes from the illusion of ego-driven success. Ego seeks intensity, big effort, big gestures, dramatic changes. Systems build consistency, small effort, repeated without drama. Intensity burns hot for a moment. Consistency burns steady for a lifetime. Think about the people who accomplish massive goals, authors who publish book after book, musicians who produce albums for decades, entrepreneurs who build multiple companies, creators who sustain output for years. They are not always motivated. They are not always inspired. They are not always disciplined. But they have systems. They write at the same time every day. They practice on schedules. They delegate. They automate. They batch tasks. They reduce decision-making. They build infrastructure, so their output doesn't depend on how they feel. You can apply systems to almost anything: learning, fitness, finances, relationships, creativity, productivity. A relationship enriched through weekly rituals will outlast one dependent on occasional romantic gestures. A career built on skill development systems will outperform a career built on hoping for big breaks. Systems beat emotion because systems don't care how you feel today. Of course, systems don't remove effort entirely. They just make effort sustainable. And sustainability is often the deciding factor between people who change their lives and people who only imagine changing their lives. Without systems, you rely on motivation. With systems, you rely on structure. Motivation is temporary. Structure is durable. The question to ask is simple. Where in my life am I relying on discipline, and where can I build systems instead? Look for repeatable behaviors. Anything you want to do daily, weekly, or monthly. If you repeat it, systemize it. If you want it long-term, make it automatic. The more you systemize, the less you struggle. The less you struggle, the more you grow. Life rewards those who understand that greatness isn't built in moments of intensity. It's built in the quiet rhythm of consistency. And consistency belongs to those who build systems that make success the default instead of the exception. Chapter 9. Measure success with metrics that actually matter. One of the most subtle traps in life is measuring success with the wrong metrics. If you use the wrong scoreboard, you will spend years chasing victories that leave you strangely unsatisfied once you achieve them. The world offers plenty of scoreboards to choose from: income, status, prestige, likes, followers, titles, awards, assets, and trophies. And while these markers can reflect accomplishment, they do not guarantee fulfillment. They do not guarantee growth. They do not guarantee peace. They do not guarantee meaning. They simply measure one dimension of life and ignore the others. This mismatch between what you measure and what you need is why so many people appear successful externally while feeling empty internally. They won by society's metrics, but lost by their own. They reached the mountaintop and wondered why the view didn't feel as rich as they imagined. They chased applause only to discover applause doesn't last. They accumulated things that didn't translate into a deeper sense of being alive. When your metrics are wrong, your victories feel like losses. To escape this illusion, you must first examine what metrics actually matter to you. And often, those metrics are quieter. They are less performative. They are less glamorous. They are things like personal growth, emotional resilience, healthier relationships, deeper peace, sustained curiosity, aligned purpose, contribution, and the ability to live your life without betraying yourself. These are not metrics you can boast about easily at a dinner table, but they are metrics that determine the quality and integrity of your experience. Consider how you currently measure your days. Do you evaluate your success based on productivity alone? Based on financial gain? Based on how busy you felt? A more meaningful set of questions might be: did I learn something today? Did I improve in some area? Did I honor my values? Did I move closer to my long-term direction rather than just today's urgency? Did I protect my authenticity? When these are your metrics, your relationship with success changes. It becomes internal rather than external. It becomes self-directed rather than socially approved. Another important shift is measuring success by what you can control. Many people judge themselves by outcomes that depend heavily on external forces, market conditions, timing, other people's decisions, or pure luck. When you measure success by controllables, effort, learning, preparation, consistency, resilience, you regain agency. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstance and start feeling like an architect of your own trajectory. There is also the issue of time. Some metrics are too short. They only measure success in days or weeks, when meaningful progress often requires months, years, or even decades. If your timeline is too small, you will misinterpret your progress and sabotage yourself prematurely. For example, if you measure fitness by what the scale says at the end of the week, you may quit too soon. But if you measure fitness by energy levels, strength, movement quality, and long-term consistency, you begin to see gains that the scale cannot capture. Similarly, if you measure creativity by how many people notice your work immediately, you will abandon projects that require slow cultivation. But if you measure creativity by depth, originality, improvement and completion, you sustain the work long enough to reap its rewards. The metrics you choose also shape your identity. If you measure yourself by external validation, you become dependent on it. If you measure yourself by comparison, you become enslaved to other people's trajectories. If you measure yourself by speed, you become impatient and anxious. But if you measure yourself by alignment, you become anchored. If you measure yourself by contribution, you become generous. If you measure yourself by learning, you become adaptable. Metrics quietly determine who you become. At some point you must ask, what does a successful life look like to me? Not to society, not to social media, not to your parents, not to the people you're trying to impress, to you, because you are the one who must live with the consequences of your metrics. And the consequences compound. When you select metrics that reflect the life you actually want to live, success becomes both more achievable and more satisfying. You no longer chase approval, you chase alignment. You no longer seek applause, you seek growth. You no longer need to prove anything, you simply build something that feels true. And when you look back years later, you won't feel like you lived someone else's life, you'll feel like you lived your own. Chapter 10. Regulate your emotions before they spend your time. Time isn't only spent through actions, it's spent through emotions. Unregulated emotions consume hours, days, and even years without you realizing what happened. Anger can waste an evening. Anxiety can waste a week. Resentment can waste a season. Fear can waste a decade. The irony is that most people don't think of emotional control as a form of time management, but it might be the most important one. If you cannot regulate your emotions, you cannot direct your time. And if you cannot direct your time, you cannot direct your life. Emotions are not the enemy. They're signals. They give you feedback about what you value, what you fear, and what you need to address. But signals are meant to be interpreted, not obeyed blindly. When emotions turn into reactions without awareness, they hijack your time. Think about how much life is drained by rumination, overthinking, arguing, regretting, replaying conversations, worrying about imagined futures, or resenting past events. None of that moves your life forward. It feels urgent in the moment, but it rarely changes anything in reality. Unregulated emotions make small problems feel like emergencies. They turn discomfort into avoidance and criticism into catastrophe. They create illusions of threat even when there is no danger. And because the mind treats emotional experiences as real as physical events, the cost is not only internal, it shows up externally in lost time and lost opportunities. The first step in regulating emotions is widening the gap between impulse and response. That tiny gap is where maturity lives. It's where wisdom lives. It's where you decide whether an emotion deserves action or simply acknowledgement. The ego wants instant reactions. The ego thrives on immediacy. React now, respond later. But immediacy is expensive. It pulls you into unnecessary conflict, drama, panic, and distraction. When you learn to pause, you reclaim agency. You take back the steering wheel. Another form of emotional leakage comes from catastrophizing. The mind loves narratives. It loves to turn possibilities into stories, and stories into threats. What if I fail? becomes I'm going to fail, what if they don't like me, becomes they are against me. The emotional cost of these imagined scenarios is enormous, and yet none of them are real. Emotional regulation means learning to challenge these stories rather than surrender to them. You ask, is this true? Or is this fear pretending to be truth? Many problems dissolve under that question. Emotional regulation also means recognizing when you are borrowing emotional energy from your future. Procrastination is a perfect example. Avoidance offers immediate relief, but creates long-term anxiety. That anxiety compounds, consuming time you could have spent moving forward. The price of avoidance is paid twice, once in the moment you avoid the task, and again in the time you lose worrying about the task. Emotional maturity pays the price once, by doing the thing now. Relationships are another arena, where unregulated emotions waste time. A single misunderstanding can spiral into days of silence, weeks of tension, or years of unresolved distance. Difficult conversations feel uncomfortable, so people avoid them. But avoidance rarely fixes anything. It just stretches the discomfort over a longer period. Trained emotional regulation allows you to address conflict before it becomes complicated, to clarify before resentment forms, and to express needs before they become ultimatums. But emotional regulation isn't about suppression. Suppression is denial with a suit on. Suppressed emotions leak sideways through cynicism, irritability, passive aggression, or burnout. Regulation is different. Regulation means acknowledging emotions, understanding them, and choosing a response that aligns with your values rather than your impulses. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being emotionally responsible. People often assume emotional regulation is a personality trait, but it's more like a skill. Skills can be trained, skills can be sharpened, skills can be mastered. Training begins with awareness, knowing what you feel, when you feel it and why. Then comes labeling, naming the emotion instead of drowning in it. Then comes separation, realizing you are experiencing an emotion, but you are not the emotion. Once that separation exists, decisions improve dramatically. The reward for emotional regulation is not just inner peace, it's time. Time to think clearly, time to choose wisely, time to build instead of react, time to progress instead of regress, time to become who you are trying to become. If you want to escape the illusion of urgency, you must regulate your emotions. If you want to escape the illusion of being busy without living, you must regulate your emotions. If you want to escape the illusion of ego, comparison, or constant distraction, emotional regulation is one of the most powerful tools you will ever develop, because at the end of the day, the battle isn't just for your attention, it's for your time and emotions. Left unexamined, will spend your time for you. Chapter 11. Master your craft before you chase recognition. Recognition is seductive. It tells you that you are seen, appreciated, validated, respected, admired. It whispers that your work matters, that you matter. And because of this, many people chase recognition long before they chase mastery. They want to be celebrated before they become capable. They want applause before they build substance. They want the spotlight before they earn the right to stand under it. But recognition without mastery is fragile. It crumbles quickly, and it rarely satisfies. Every craft, whether artistic, athletic, entrepreneurial, academic, or creative, demands a period of obscurity, a period where the world does not clap, a period where no one notices the hours you are putting in, a period where effort exceeds reward, where the work feels one-sided, and where the only person who understands why you keep going is you. This phase is not a punishment, it is the forge. It shapes depth, skill, and authenticity. Without the forge, mastery does not form. The problem is that the ego hates obscurity. The ego wants recognition now. It wants metrics, praise, reposts, validation, attention. It wants shortcuts that leapfrog past the messy middle. And modern culture amplifies this ego by rewarding surface-level visibility. You can be seen without being skilled. You can be followed without being wise. You can be famous without being excellent. But the gap always reveals itself later. Without mastery, recognition becomes hollow. It becomes dependent on novelty instead of substance. You are only relevant until the next distraction arrives. Mastery, on the other hand, compounds. It makes you valuable. It makes you irreplaceable. When you master your craft, you don't need to chase recognition, because recognition begins to chase you. People are drawn to depth. They are drawn to quality. They are drawn to someone who has clearly done the work. Substance signals itself. It does not need a billboard. Mastery also gives you options. When you are excellent, you can choose when and how to show your work. You can negotiate differently. You can set boundaries. You can say no to opportunities that do not align with you. People who rely on recognition for identity cannot say no, because they fear disappearing. But mastery ensures you don't disappear, you endure. A key principle of mastering any craft is embracing repetition. Repetition builds neural pathways, confidence, precision, intuition, and timing. Repetition makes the difficult familiar, and the familiar effortless. Many people quit before repetition has a chance to work its magic, because repetition feels boring. It lacks novelty. But novelty is a spectator sport, not a builder's tool. Builders repeat, builders refine, builders iterate. Builders endure the parts that are unglamorous, because they understand that the glamorous outcome sits on top of thousands of unglamorous hours. Mastery also requires humility. Humility is what lets you learn without defensiveness, accept feedback without injury, and improve without resentment. People who chase recognition without humility stagnate quickly, because they cannot bear the discomfort of being seen as a beginner. But beginners who embrace humility evolve faster than talented people who cling to ego. Talent can give you a head start, but humility keeps you in the race long enough to win. And here's another truth. Mastery takes time, not weeks, not months, often years, sometimes decades. This timeline scares people because we live in a world that celebrates the overnight success story, without mentioning the 15 years of preparation that came before it. But anything that lasts is built slowly. Anything that compounds requires patience. Anything that becomes extraordinary demands sacrifice. So how do you know if you are chasing mastery or recognition? Ask yourself, would I still do this if no one ever found out? The person chasing recognition will hesitate. The person chasing mastery won't. Mastery is intrinsically rewarding. Recognition is extrinsically rewarding. Extrinsic rewards burn out. Intrinsic rewards endure. Mastery is also generous. It allows you to give rather than perform. A master doesn't just execute their craft, they elevate others through it. A master carpenter builds homes that shelter families. A master writer gives language to feelings people couldn't articulate. A master coach turns raw potential into real capability. Recognition is inward. Mastery is outward. It contributes. And here's the final paradox. When you stop chasing recognition and commit to mastery, the recognition you once chased begins to appear. It arrives naturally, on its own timeline. Drawn to depth the way gravity pulls objects together. People can ignore hype, but they cannot ignore excellence forever. So choose the quieter path. The patient path. The path that doesn't always feel glamorous, but always feels true. Master your craft first. Let recognition come second. Because recognition is temporary. But mastery becomes part of who you are. Chapter 12. Stop playing the comparison game entirely. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose sight of your own life. It tricks you into measuring yourself against people who have different stories, different paths, different timelines, and different priorities. Yet the modern world makes comparison effortless. You can compare careers, bodies, relationships, incomes, vacations, achievements, reputations, and lifestyles in seconds. And because you are comparing the behind the scenes of your life with the highlight reel of someone else's, you almost always feel like you are losing. Comparison makes you forget the context. It makes you forget the unseen work, the unseen failures, and the unseen trade-offs. It convinces you that everyone else is ahead, and you are falling behind. The truth is, you cannot win a game you never agreed to play, and comparison is a game with no finish line. Even if you reach the level you once admired, you will find someone else who is further, faster, wealthier, more accomplished, or more admired. The gap never closes. It just shifts. That's because comparison is not really about other people. It's about insecurity. The moment you chase validation through comparison, you outsource your worth to external rankings. You allow strangers to define what good enough means. You give up sovereignty over your own metrics. Comparison also distorts perception. You may see the success of others, but you rarely see the cost they paid for it. You see the reward, not the sacrifice. You see the result, not the process. You see the applause, not the loneliness. You see the confidence, not the doubt. Ambition always has a price, yet comparison pretends the price doesn't exist. It's easy to envy someone else's destination when you assume they traveled without difficulty. Another problem with comparison is timeline distortion. People bloom at different times. Some succeed early, some succeed late. Some reinvent themselves halfway through life. Some start over repeatedly until they find alignment. Comparison makes you rush your timeline because you assume there is a schedule you must follow, or a finish line you must cross before a certain age. But the world is full of people who peaked at 40, 50 or 60, and built lives richer than they ever imagined. Growth doesn't care about age. It cares about readiness. Comparison ignores readiness entirely. To stop playing the comparison game, you must first recognize how subtle it is. Comparison doesn't always show up as envy. Sometimes it shows up as shame. Sometimes it shows up as urgency. Sometimes it shows up as pressure. Sometimes it shows up as anxiety, disguised as ambition. When you hear thoughts like "I should be further by now," or "They've figured it out, why haven't I?" or "Everyone else seems to know what they're doing," comparison is whispering in the background. The antidote to comparison is direction. When you know what you are building and why, you stop caring as much about what others are building. You stop getting distracted by their speed because you are focused on your trajectory. You stop getting jealous of their recognition because you are busy earning your mastery. People who lack direction almost always default to comparison because they have no internal compass, so they borrow someone else's. Another antidote is gratitude, not the surface level kind that feels forced, but the grounded kind that recognizes the wealth hiding in your life. Gratitude interrupts comparison by reminding you that you already possess things you once prayed for. It reminds you that progress is happening, even if it isn't loud. It reminds you that your journey is valid, even if it looks different from others. It also helps to change the lens entirely. Instead of seeing people as competition, see them as information. Their success can teach you what's possible. Their journey can reveal strategies. Their mastery can inspire you to refine your own craft. When comparison becomes learning instead of insecurity, growth accelerates. But the real breakthrough comes when you choose to measure yourself against your past instead of someone else's present. The only meaningful comparison is between who you were and who you are becoming. If you are learning, improving, healing, building, and aligning, even imperfectly, you are moving forward. That's the game worth playing. The goal is not to be the best compared to others, but to be better compared to your previous self. That is a game you can win. That is a game that generates fulfillment. That is a game aligned with reality instead of illusion. When you stop playing the comparison game entirely, life doesn't just feel lighter, it becomes clearer. You reclaim time, attention, confidence and direction. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop rushing your journey, and you finally begin living a life that belongs to you. Chapter 13. Create value you'd be proud to die with. Every person leaves something behind. It might be a body of work, a way of thinking, a set of relationships, a family, a story, a craft, a contribution, or simply a memory of how they lived. The question is not whether you will leave something, it's what. And for many people, this question doesn't surface until late in life, when time has already been traded for obligations that never felt meaningful. The illusion is believing that value is measured only in achievements that others can see. The deeper truth is that value is also built quietly, through depth, contribution, and integrity. When life ends, the scoreboard changes. Few people care about how expensive your possessions were. People care about the value you created through how you lived and what you built. Creating value that survives you requires you to shift from consumption to contribution. Consumption feels good in the moment. Contribution feels meaningful over time. Consumption satisfies the ego. Contribution satisfies the soul. The ego wants to accumulate. The soul wants to create. And here lies one of the hidden illusions of the modern age. We are told the good life is about acquiring more, when the good life is actually about building more. More wisdom, more resilience, more skill, more generosity, more meaning, more impact. That is value you can die with. But value is not created by accident. It emerges from intentional work directed at something larger than your immediate comfort. It comes from projects, skills, crafts, missions and relationships that matter enough to outlive convenience. You cannot build something meaningful if you are constantly seeking shortcuts. You cannot build something lasting if you are always seeking applause. Longevity and vanity rarely coexist. Vanity wants recognition now. Legacy wants contribution that compounds. So ask yourself, what am I building that I would be proud for people to remember? It does not have to be grand, impressive, or world-changing. It only has to be real. A teacher who transforms students leaves value. A parent who raises capable, kind, self-respecting children leaves value. A craftsman who masters their trade leaves value. A thinker who articulates what others feel but cannot express leaves value. A leader who lifts others rather than stepping on them leaves value. Value is not measured by scale. It is measured by depth. Another dimension of legacy is character. The world rarely remembers what you owned, but it often remembers how you moved through life, how you treated others, how you faced hardship, how you held yourself under pressure, how you honored your word, how you showed up when it mattered. Character is a kind of value no one can steal or counterfeit. It cannot be inflated through performance. It must be lived. Creating value you'd be proud to die with also means developing skills that make you useful. Usefulness is severely underrated. A useful person can contribute in any environment. A useful person creates opportunities rather than waits for them. A useful person is never fully unemployed because they possess abilities that translate into value. When you become useful, you become needed. When you become needed, you become relevant. Usefulness is one of the purest forms of wealth. Then there is the value of ideas. Ideas move through generations. They outlive the body. They shape cultures, relationships, beliefs, and behaviors. A single idea can outlast an entire empire. But ideas only endure when articulated, shared, and refined. Many people die with ideas still inside them, unexpressed because of fear, perfectionism, or the need to be impressive before speaking. You do not need to be brilliant to contribute. You just need to be willing. But here's a deeper layer. Creating value requires courage. It requires the courage to start when you are unprepared, the courage to continue when progress is slow, the courage to ignore critics who misunderstand, and the courage to revise when you realize you can do better. Value emerges through cycles of effort and reflection, not through singular bursts of inspiration. It also requires responsibility. You cannot create value while constantly outsourcing your life to distraction, comparison, ego, and consumption. You must choose to participate in creation rather than merely observe. You must choose to play the role of builder rather than spectator. Most people watch, few people make. The ones who make leave fingerprints on the world. And perhaps the most important distinction, value is not what you leave when you are gone. It is what you offer while you are here. Death only clarifies the score. If you want to escape the illusion of money, time and ego, you must begin asking a different set of questions. Not how do I get more, but how do I contribute more? Not how do I look successful, but how do I become useful? Not how do I impress strangers, but how do I serve what matters? Because in the end, the only wealth that lasts is the wealth that can't be taken from you, and the wealth you can leave behind. Chapter 14. Use mortality to clarify what truly matters. Nothing sharpens perspective like remembering you will not be here forever. Mortality is not meant to depress you. It is meant to clarify you. It strips away illusion, vanity, and distraction. It forces you to confront the difference between what is urgent and what is important, what is meaningful and what is superficial, what is real and what is performance. When you keep mortality close, not as fear but as awareness, you begin to see life with unusual honesty. Most people avoid thinking about mortality because it feels heavy. But avoiding it doesn't change anything. It only makes you more vulnerable to wasting your life on things that will never matter. When you forget you are temporary, you begin to behave as if time is infinite. You postpone dreams. You tolerate relationships that drain you. You participate in social performances. You buy things to impress people you don't respect. You chase metrics that lose meaning as soon as you achieve them. The illusion of endless time makes distraction feel affordable. Awareness of mortality makes distraction feel expensive. There is a quiet power in imagining the end of your life, not morbidly, but honestly. Ask yourself, if today were one of the last days, what would actually matter? It is remarkable how quickly that question reorganizes priorities. Money matters, but not as much as we pretend. Status matters, but not as much as we chase. Ego matters, but only until life humbles us. What truly matters are things we often neglect: people we care about, work that feels meaningful, skills that bring pride, experiences that shape us, contributions that outlive us, and inner peace that cannot be purchased. Mortality also frees you from the fear of embarrassment. Much of what holds people back, fear of judgment, rejection, failure, or looking inexperienced, recedes when you recognize how temporary everything is. The person you fear being judged by will also die. The audience whose approval you chase will eventually disappear. The timeline you think you're behind on does not exist. When you shrink the significance of social fear through the lens of mortality, you become braver. You take chances. You speak honestly. You try things. You build instead of hesitate. You stop living for spectators and start living for your soul. Mortality also teaches you the value of presence. A conversation with someone you love becomes more meaningful when you remember you will not always have access to them. A walk becomes richer when you know you will not always be able to walk. A sunrise becomes more beautiful when you understand there are only so many left. Presence is not a luxury, it is a result of awareness. People who forget mortality live in their heads. People who remember mortality live in the moment. There is another gift hidden in mortality: urgency. Not frantic urgency, but purposeful urgency. The kind that pushes you toward what you want instead of delaying it indefinitely. There is a form of suffering created, not by failure, but by endless postponement. "I'll start later" becomes "it's too late" for more people than we realize. Mortality interrupts that pattern. It whispers, "Start now. Try now. Say it now. Build it now. Fix it now. Apologize now. Learn now." Not because you are running out of time tomorrow, but because you don't actually know how much time you have. Mortality also dissolves pettiness. So many conflicts, grudges, and resentments suddenly feel small when viewed through the lens of a limited life. You recognize that certain arguments are not worth winning, that certain relationships are not worth sacrificing, that certain apologies are not worth delaying, and that certain dreams are not worth abandoning. You begin to distinguish between battles of the ego and battles of the heart. And then there is meaning, perhaps the ultimate filter mortality provides. Meaning is not found in the loudest parts of life, but in the deepest. It hides in conversations, in commitments, in attempts, in acts of creation, in contributions, in courage. Mortality makes meaning non-negotiable because it removes the illusion that you have infinite time to find it later. There is a symbolic exercise worth considering. Imagine your life as a book. What chapter are you in? How many pages remain? What story are you writing? Does the plot honor you? Are you the protagonist, or merely a background character in someone else's narrative? Mortality encourages you to revise your chapters while you still have blank pages left. In the end, mortality is not the enemy. The real enemy is living as if you are immortal, because when time feels infinite, almost anything can be postponed. But when time becomes finite, almost everything becomes urgent in the right way, not rushed, but essential. Mortality doesn't take away meaning, it reveals it. Chapter 15. Live with awareness. Instead of ego reactivity, one of the greatest sources of suffering in human life is not what happens to us, but how we react to what happens. Ego reactivity is immediate, automatic, defensive, and impulsive. It wants to win, to protect itself, to be right, to look strong, to avoid vulnerability, and to maintain a narrative of superiority or perfection. But ego reactivity costs time, peace, relationships, and clarity. It drains energy and attention away from what actually matters. Awareness, on the other hand, is deliberate. It pauses, it observes, it interprets, it chooses. Awareness gives you space. Space between stimulus and response, between emotion and action, between impulse and decision. Ego reactivity thrives on speed. It thrives on doing first and thinking later. When someone criticizes you, the ego wants to attack. When someone misunderstands you, the ego wants to defend. When someone succeeds, the ego wants to compare. When someone disagrees, the ego wants to prove. When life blocks you, the ego wants to become resentful. The ego fears losing control, so it reacts quickly to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty. But reacting quickly often creates bigger problems than the initial trigger itself. Many conflicts grow not because of the event, but because of the ego's insistence on being right about the event. Awareness introduces accountability. It asks, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling it? Is my reaction aligned with who I want to be, or is it just an ego reflex? These questions are powerful because most people never ask them. They allow habits, conditioning, insecurity, or pride to run their lives on autopilot. Awareness turns off autopilot. It brings you back to the driver's seat. Living with awareness also changes how you interpret other people. Ego reactivity assumes everything is personal. Awareness realizes most things are not. Awareness understands that people project their fears, frustrations, and insecurities outward. Awareness recognizes that criticism often tells you more about the critic than about you. Awareness understands that people act out of their own histories and pressures rather than a secret vendetta against you. When you stop personalizing everything, you stop bleeding time and energy on unnecessary emotional battles. Another benefit of awareness is that it slows down escalation. Many problems in life are not caused by initial disagreements, but by how those disagreements are handled. A small misunderstanding becomes an argument becomes a conflict becomes distance becomes resentment, and resentment becomes a quiet separation that could have been prevented. Awareness interrupts this chain at the beginning. It says, pause, observe, clarify, respond intentionally. That single pause can save relationships, opportunities, and peace of mind. Awareness also dissolves illusions. Ego creates illusions all the time. It exaggerates threats, inflates importance, imagines worst-case scenarios, and makes everything about identity. Awareness looks at reality as it is, not as the ego fears it to be. When you live with awareness, life becomes simpler. Not because it becomes easier, but because you stop adding unnecessary complexity inside your mind. To live with awareness instead of ego reactivity, you must become comfortable with a kind of inner witnessing. You must learn to observe your thoughts without immediately believing them. Not every thought deserves obedience. Not every feeling deserves action. Not every impulse deserves indulgence. Awareness allows you to see your inner world without being ruled by it. This is the beginning of true agency. Another key aspect is emotional literacy. If you cannot name what you're feeling, your reactions will often express themselves in unhealthy ways. Anger often disguises fear. Pride often disguises insecurity. Withdrawal often disguises shame. When you live with awareness, you gain the ability to decode your own emotions instead of letting them run the show. You can address the root instead of fight the surface. Awareness also makes life richer. When you are present, you actually taste your food, hear your conversations, notice your environment, feel your emotions, and experience the subtle layers of life that ego reactivity bulldozes through. The ego wants speed, awareness wants depth. The ego wants validation, awareness wants truth. The ego wants applause, awareness wants alignment. Awareness does not require perfection, it requires practice. You will still react sometimes, you will still get triggered, you will still feel the pull of ego, but over time the gap between trigger and reaction grows.